From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Welcome to our noon program. This is one of a series of programs that the Serial and Government Publications Division tries to hold as they relate to our collections. This time we're celebrating our comic book collection once again. And some of you may know or not that in August of 2011, the library signed an agreement with the Small Press Expo. And that has given us the ability to collect from independent publishers of comic books and comic art. And in fact, it gives us the ability to collect all the SPX Ignatz Awards, all the winners. This will be our third year going to that conference and collecting and bringing back to the library materials such as the ones that we have on display. We're fortunate to have Heidi MacDonald with us. She's been an observer of the comic book industry and a supporter of the small press publishers. In fact, this past spring, she donated her own mini comics collection to the library, and we have it in our division safely in a vault. And some of those comic books are on display for you to see later on. Her collection has at least 570 pieces, so it's pretty extensive, and we really are happy to have it. It is the second one of a special collection that we acquired through our connection with SPX. Some of you may have been here last year when Dean Haspiel was here to do his presentation, and he too gave us his special mini comics collection. So today, Heidi is going to be talking with us about the development of the graphic novel, a topic for which she is ideally suited. Some of you may know, I think probably most of you know, that she is the editor of the news blog, a comic book blog, The Beat. If you haven't been to it, it's really a good blog. It has lots of good information about publishers, writers, new reviews, all sorts of things, so it's really good. She also is the comics review editor at Publishers Weekly. And then, this part is amazing to me. Since 1982, she has been a contributing writer to the Comics Journal. So, eminently qualified. Let's welcome Heidi MacDonald.
Well, thank you so much, Georgia. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to twiddle. I can't resist. No, it just does not want to say I'm on. So, all right. Well, thank you very much for having me here and for accepting my collection, which you know, we normally kind of think of them. We're all pack rats in the comic book industry. So, you know, having a box of these objects around that I treasured very much, and being able to find a place like the Library of Congress to house them and to enable them to be seen by future generations is absolutely thrilling, needless to say, and to have it housed here is very inspiring. I will say, as a pack rat, it is very difficult to get rid of things. On the day that Warren Bernard of SPX came to pick up the collection, we went to my storage unit, and an afternoon was spent moving boxes, finding things, going through them. You know, they're packed up to be transitioned, and Warren got his car. The boxes were put into the trunk, and I saw them, and I was like, oh, well, I guess you know, it's better to let go of things. But I felt sad because I'm a pack rat. And, you know, here at the Library of Congress is really based on the wonderful deeds of pack rats through the ages. So I came home, I turned on the television, on the History Channel. There was a special on the Library of Congress that explained how the wonderful acts of preservation are done here, the care that is taken, the amazing holdings, the bunkers full of incredible, priceless materials. And I was like, well, you know what? I am now part of that. So it was meant to be. So despite the fact that I am talking about, I donated my mini comics to the Library of Congress, I'm actually talking about graphic novels today, which are the longer versions of comics. And ironically, and why am I doing graphic novels? Well, as mentioned, Georgia mentioned that I am reviews editor of Publishers Weekly, and for the past 10 years, and I've seen quite a bit of the development of the graphic novel through that. And what I wanted to talk about is people know Mouse and Watchmen and a few other books that I'll mention that are very well known. And so I kind of wanted, in my own idiosyncratic kind of my own personal talk about some other books that I feel are very influential and have a great novelistic literary value that kind of have contributed to the development but aren't quite as well known. So let me see if I'm not PC conversant, so it's always a little difficult for me here. But what we'll do is, well, yes, okay. But I do want to talk a little bit about myself because I've donated my collection. So yes, from an early age, I like to wear a cape, as you can see here. And, you know, despite the Incredible saying it wasn't a thing to wear, but I guess I always had that, you know, early cosplay, which cosplay, of course, is costume play as you dress up. Everybody sees them at the Comic-Con now. And can people hear me, by the way? You can hear me in the back row? All right, so, you know, we'll just drink some water and keep going. Now, people, Lisa Donnelly, she asked me earlier on the elevator coming up here, how did you get into comics? I said, well, come to the slideshow, and you'll find out. But my mother was a cartoonist, Susanna Lasker. Now, signed her name Suzu. She was an early underground cartoonist, you know, not extensively, but she did do some comics. She really is more into painting. That's always been her first love. This is this is one of her more recent works. I love this one. So, you know, people read their slideshows. So I'm going to read it to you. Some storm, eh, Ma? You call this a storm? One time a nor'easter blew in. The dinghy stove in the outhouse. Some storm, eh, Ma? So, yes, you laughed at my mother's cartoon. All right. So, anyway, I love this. She's a really amazing person. Now she does a lot of political posters and protests every week at the State House in Maine where she lives. Anyway, as an early comics reader, these were my beloved treasures, Donald Duck, Carl Barks, and John Stanley, whose literary value is, I believe, proven by the fact that they've remained in print for so long. And they were definitely short stories, in just 8 or 10 pages, but on the themes of greed especially. And Carl Barks' work was always about money and Little Lulu, you know, early sexual equality of Lulu and, you know, fighting the boys and coming out, winning on her own terms. She was my early hero. So, but then I got into superhero comics, and these are, I found these photos. These are pretty amazing. This is me as a teenager at an early New York Comic-Con, going through the stacks, and you know, this photo really makes it look like I'm surrounded by people who are amazed that there's a girl going through comics. I don't think it was quite like that, but maybe it wasn't that different. But you know, I'm so like dedicated to finding my back issue of the Defenders there, and I actually still own that shirt. So I did say I was a pack rat. So this is a little bit later, a little more cosplay, I guess. This is the 80s. Batman was big at the late 80s. And here is San Diego Comic-Con, circa 1990. This is how we partied back then. As you can see, not quite like the celebrity studied, although that is Bill Mumy from Lost in Space. That's not Bill Mumy, that's me. I'm dancing with Len Wein, the creator of Swamp Thing. And, but yeah, Bill Mumy's playing. But anyway, that's the San Diego Comic-Con back in the day. Let's see. Oh, I worked at Disney and I cosplay. Yeah, this is Halloween at the Walt Disney lot. So I wasn't afraid to dress up. I wish I'd had the other way because you could have seen the Seven Dwarfs facade by Michael Graves. But anyway, and here, this is my first published work, the Comics Journal. Yes, 1982. I had forgotten until I put together this slideshow that the first published work I had was in this magazine that had Carl Barks, my favorite cartoonist of all times, on the cover. I had actually forgotten that until just when I was putting these together. So I mean, at the time, it must have just been the most exciting thing possible for me to now be united with Carl Barks. And I feel that's in comics. One of the reasons why I've stuck with it for so long is because it's very approachable. And if anybody's planning to go to Small Press Expo this weekend, I mean, there's so many great cartoonists who are here for it. And just the fact you can go up and talk to these creators and they're so personable. I mean, it's a very collegial atmosphere. This was another piece of my first cover story. I didn't like fight scenes, which there's a lot of them in superhero comics, but already at this point, very early in my career, I had begun to tire of the tropes of the fight scene and was analyzing them in terms of the WWE and you know, why fights in wrestling and fights in comics were, you know, both boring. So anyway, another Amazing Heroes preview special, another thing I worked on. I went and worked at Disney Adventures. You know, somehow or other we thought that putting Daisy, Minnie, and Jessica Rabbit all mooning over Jason Priestley somehow created some kind of, you know, aesthetic here. I don't know, that was weird. Probably in mainstream comics, my best known work is why I just edited Why the Last Man. I had nothing to do with it except editing it. But I will say, even last weekend, 2 people told me the first comic that they had read was Why the Last Man, and it really got them hooked on it. And that's always been what I've wanted to do. I've always wanted to produce material that you don't have to be an expert in comics, or you don't have to be versed in continuity. That's something you could just pick up and from the first page say, this is a good story, and I want to read it all the way through to the last page. So I'm very happy to say the creators of Why the Last Man, Brian K. Vaughan and Pia Guerra, I think they succeeded at that admirably. And it's the book is about, in case anyone doesn't know, it's about another kind of hackneyed situation where all the men on Earth have died except one, and him and his monkey. And they go around, but in a female dominated society. But the thing that makes it interesting is that it was about sociology. It was about what happens when there are no men. It wasn't just about, oh my God, I've got all these women now. So it was a very smart book, and I think that's why people respond to it very well. Anyway, now, as mentioned, this is my website, www.comicsbeat.com, so please check it out. And anyway, now, the development of the graphic novel. So as you could tell from my interest in progressing beyond fight scenes and creating works that have more interest to general audience, the graphic novel, it's been around for a long, long time. Some people might say cave paintings were graphic novels, early graphic novels, but what makes it a novel? What makes it more than just a short story or an incident or a vignette or whatever? Well, I mean, we know with novels what they are, and I mean, I put this, of course, when you read a great book, you have the feeling of accomplishment. You have a feeling of sadness and yet joy when you turn the page of a great book, because you've seen the complexity, you've seen the characters go from one stage to another, and you've seen a theme played out in it. And of course, there's that feeling of catharsis in great works of art, which is where we purge our own emotions through them. So in comics, there are a great many stories that have these things, but in the terms of the graphic novel, I mean, there are many. So what I'm about to say is not the be-all and the end-all of graphic novels. These are just some of my favorites that I feel have these elements to them. Some of them have been more influential than others. Some of them are not as well known. Some are very well known. But just to talk about them a little bit. So let's see. Well, I'll start out. This is generally A Contract with God by Will Eisner, generally considered to be the first graphic novel in America. Now, was it? Not really. I mean, people go back and forth. It certainly was the first graphic novel that said it was a graphic novel and was considered to kind of develop that, to kind of planted the flag and said, this is a book. It's not a 32-page comic. It's an actual book that has a theme and plot and characters, has a more elevated tone to it. And it's been very influential since then. But I feel Will Eisner's work kind of comes and goes. He was a guy who did the spirit sections of the 40s. He was kind of versed in the genre trappings, but his storytelling was a lot more elevated. So I think if you read A Contract with God now, I think a lot of the arguments against it is that it does have a lot of melodrama and stereotypes. I think when you know that the first story in it is about a man whose daughter dies and he kind of turns against God, and when you know that Eisner's own daughter died, so that this was a reaction against it, I think actually knowing the backstory kind of gives it a little bit more power, which is not actually what it should be. It should be all on the page. But anyway, aside from that, I call these the big seven. That if you've heard of a graphic novel, how many of you have heard of a book on this list? So, yes, right, okay. Like if you've heard of a graphic novel, it's probably one of these. So I'm not even going to enumerate them, but I put the dates in there so you could kind of see how they developed. Obviously, Watchmen, Dark Knight, Mouse all came out around the same time. Very influential, all of them complicated themes. Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi probably kicked off what I would call the modern graphic novel, the literary graphic novel. Published in France in 2000, came out here in 2003. Obviously, it's a story about a young girl growing up in Iran, how she, her family is part of the Persian culture. There's, against the Islamists. There's the social, conflicts that come in there. Her own, need to break free of that and to make her own life. And obviously, by the time this book was published, I do feel the social climate post 9/11 really made a lot of interest in this book, but it continues to be very popular to this day. If you look at the bestseller list at any time, you will see 5 of these 7 books on it at any given time, any given week. Fun Home, another memoir by Alison Bechdel. It's interesting that the 3 books by women on this list, Persepolis, Fun Home, and Smile, are all actually autobiographies. The others my men are all fantasies, so I don't know what that tells you. But these books all very popular from the minute they were published, still read today. So that's why I kind of wanted to say but there's more. And if any of you are comics aficionados, you were thinking to yourself on the last slide, but what? How can she not mention Chris Ware and Daniel Clowes and Love and Rockets by the Hernandez brothers? And all of them were guests here last year at SPX. I feel Building Stories was an amazing book, but it just came out last year, and I don't feel it's been as accepted into these 7 books that it's always on the bestseller list. And same thing with Daniel Clowes and the Hernandez brothers. I feel like their books are amazing, but they haven't quite had not the awareness that the previous 7 were. But of course, they're amazingly brilliant books. But in the comics field, I think they're very well known, which is why I'm not talking about them today. So what am I talking about? I don't know. What am I talking about? This is a book that came out. These are some books. I'm just going to run through a couple that came out during that same kind of Watchmen, Dark Knight period, and people were really like, wow, you've got to read this. Like, this is a real graphic novel. And they had some of the qualities I was talking about earlier in terms of the complexity and the character development. So Violent Cases by Neil Gaiman and Dave McKean. Now, Neil Gaiman, of course, we know, and this was actually his first well-known work. This was what got people's attention and said, this Gaiman guy is somebody we should pay attention to, and it got him his gig writing Sandman, and the rest is history. And now he's a Newbery Award-winning author. This book, you can see on the right there, it's drawn by McKean, and the main character looks a lot like Neil Gaiman. It's about a young boy growing up, it's about a man remembering being a boy growing up in Portsmouth in England who has to go see an osteopath, which is a bone doctor, because he's broken a bone. And the osteopath once worked for Al Capone. So it's just like this kind of oddball little incident. But Gaiman, in his artistry, kind of creates this whole symphony of memory and childhood and what is truth and what do we remember. And McKean, with his kind of collage-y type art, is very uniquely suited to execute this. But just kind of some of the books I'm talking about we keep coming back to, and this theme Neil Gaiman has come back to several times. And whoops, what are you doing here? Okay, yes. So he came back to it again just like a few years later with Mr. Punch, which is again about a man looking back at his youth. This time through the lens of a puppet show, the Punch and Judy show, and again illustrated by McKean. It was kind of a more fleshed out version, I guess, of some of the themes from Violent Cases. And yet, I don't think anybody, I don't know, is anybody a Mr. Punch fan? Has anybody ever, okay, all right, yeah, right, yeah. So it's not, I think people kind of like Violent Cases more because it's a little bit more authentic, I think. It was a little bit more real. Of course, Gaiman has returned to the same theme in his novel that just came out this year, The Ocean at the End of the Lane, which is, again, about a man remembering a boy growing up in Portsmouth. So, but I think this is probably his best realized version of this theme. But anyway, but when Violent Cases came out, it not only put Neil Gaiman's name on the scene, but it also, it's about 64 pages, I guess, and it was a very concentrated narrative, and it definitely impressed a lot of people with the graphic novel. Now, another book that came out around the same time was Fires by Lorenzo Matodi. Now, of all the books I mentioned, this is the one that's not in print. So if there are any publishers out there who would like to bring this book back into print in English, I know Matodi would love it. So just, planting the seed. Matodi is an Italian artist. He's more influenced by the European style of art. So this is a story about a sailor named Absinthe who's on a battleship. And they discover this island where the natives are exert this strange influence over Absinthe. So it's kind of an explication of the nature versus civilization theme that we see in a lot of books. A lot of times Melville, of course, had a lot of this in his early works too, where the sailor discovers this primitive culture and is changed by it. What was really great about Fires is that Matodi is such an amazing artist. And I tried to scan in some of the pages, and because it's not a lot, and they're very bad scans, so I really apologize for them. But, he's expressionist, very influenced by De Chirico, by printmakers. He uses color throughout the whole graphic novel to show the sailor and the natives. Like, it's always used, whenever a color is used, it heightens the emotional impact of it. And really, this is one of the most beautiful graphic novels of all times. So I don't know. I'm now like, who has read this book? Has anybody here read this? So, okay, two people have read it. All right. So, well, it's not in print, so you're not going to have an easy time. But you can go on Amazon. But what was great about it is, again, it was this really concentrated storyline that was totally committed to, and really the theme was played out so well. And at the end, Absinthe must choose between fire of the natives on the island or the fire of the ship, where they're going to bombard the island, so to bring it into line with civilization. So he has to choose between these two elements. Again, just to talk a little bit about influence of these kind of books, even though it's not in English. I mean, it is well known, I think, in European comics. So another book that's quite like that is The Speed Debater by Christophe Blaine, published by NBM, which is also about a sailor. These two sailors are down in the depths of a ship and finding evil down, like it's a huge world ship, and they find down the engine room where they work, like things are not as they should be. And I actually really love this book. It's pretty obscure, but I love graphic novels of the sea. I just put this slide in here just to show. I think that we talk a lot about. Oh, there we go. Yes, thank you. We talk a lot about superheroes and the autobiography and everything. But I think it's fascinating to look at comics and how there really are some subgenres. And there's a lot of cartoonists who love these tales of adventure in the sea. So I would create a boys and girls own adventure line of graphic novels sometime, I think. So now here is a guest. He's actually here at SPX this weekend. Part of the whole movement published by Fantagraphics in the 80s and 90s with the Dan Clowes, the Hernandez brothers, later Chris Ware, but Peter Bagge was in there. And he's kind of getting his new book is out now, which is a biography of Margaret Sanger, the birth control expert. And the Bradleys is another book that's not in print, but all of Peter Bagge's material is in print. And what I loved about his stuff, which was published in 2 periodicals, one was called Hate, one was called Neat Stuff. It's just the passion of them. And the Bradleys, in the late 80s, there was all these dysfunctional families. I mean, the Simpsons, and married with children. I mean, it was a time we turned against like the happy family of the old sitcoms, Happy Days, and really went into how horrible and crappy families could really be. And I think Neat Stuff was really the Bradleys were this family in New Jersey, where I grew up. So I had a lot of empathy with it. But Buddy, Butch, and Babs Bradley are the kids and the parents, and they're all just horrible. I mean, they're just horrible people, but yet they're horrible people presented with amazing sympathy. Like, you never hate anyone, even though the book was called Hate. You just never hate anyone, because I think Bag's really wonderful quality was that he could do this manic cartooning and just really over the top stuff, but you never lost sight of the real motivations of the characters. This is a page from a story called Buddy the Weasel, where he's just being such a horrible shit to his family. I probably shouldn't have said that. But and then the last panel, it's like he's left his little brother at the park, and his mom's like, yeah, and where's Butch? He's like, Butch, good grief, I forgot all about that little pest. And you can see he's genuinely, he's worried for himself, but he does, deep down, he does care about Butch. And at the end of the story, Buddy finds himself sleeping on Hobo Beach. He's so alienated from his family that he thinks it's better to go sleep on a contaminated beach than stay with him anymore. And I love the stories in the Buddy Bradley saga. Later on, he moved to Seattle and he had a series of dysfunctional grunge girlfriends. Then eventually has to move back in with his parents. And this is, I guess I was cheating a little bit with this because it's not really a graphic novel, but when you read the stories, they're so dense in their incident and their plotting, and the characters develop so much over the series of the book that it really does have that quality that I was talking about earlier. Let's see, what do we have next? Okay, Why I Hate Saturn by Kyle Baker. How many people have read this? Has anybody? Okay, just a couple of our, sorry. So all right, so most of the people, this book is another kind of time capsule, but that came out in the late 90s, or the early 90s, excuse me. And this is really about what it was like to date in New York City and living in the early 90s. And it's about two women, Anne and her sister. You can see Anne is the one who's cringing in the front, and her sister is the one who's arriving in a costume in the back. And basically Anne has this, she's a writer and she's missing her deadlines, and she's drinking too much. And then her wacky sister in a costume shows up and things really get hilarious. This is a book of dialogue and social comedy. Kyle Baker is the author. He just listened to people and he just wrote down the hilarious things they said. There's a whole section of this book that talks about why you can't drink unless you have a driver's license. And yet, the reason why you must show your driver's license is so you won't drink too much to drive. So you could only get anyway, if you get where I'm going with this, it's like, why do you show the driving to be able to drink when you can't drink and drive? So anyway, one of the many incredible moments in Why I Hate Saturn, which is, it still stands up. There's another book by Kyle Baker called The Cowboy Wally Show, which is equally hilarious. It's about a comic who's putting on a version of Hamlet that isn't quite like Hamlet. When this book came out, it was another one where people were like, wow, you can do a whole big thick book of social comedy that doesn't have, Anne, her sister did dress up in the costume, but it has nothing to do with superheroes. It's completely set in the real world. There's nothing incredible until the ending, which a lot of people gave Baker a lot of complaints about. But it's completely real. Like, if you don't see somebody that you know in this book, you need to know more people. So, but anyway, just a great comedic. Let's see. Now this book, okay, now this is a book, all right, anybody read Hicksville? Anybody? Okay, well, see now, like, again, the three. I see Chris Pitzer here. You've read your classics. You're well-versed. Now, Hicksville is a book probably very few people outside of the comic book world have heard of, which is a shame, because I think it's the book that's most beloved of comics people and publishers. It's very near and dear to their hearts because it's about a writer who goes to this town called Hicksville where comics are worshipped as the greatest art form that there ever was. And cartoonists are like Justin Bieber. They are held in the highest renown, and their deeds are gossiped about, and you know, the greatest celebrities of this town, Hicksville. So it sounds kind of like this gimmicky story, but it's really universal. I mean, it's about mysteries and secrets, which are my two favorite. If a writer ever comes into me and says, yeah, I got a story about a mystery, I'm there. I want to know. Or I don't even need to know what the mystery is before I want to solve it. But the writer goes to the island, the town of Hicksville, and tries to find Dick Berger, the world's most famous cartoonist, and things don't go so well. Another thing I love about Hicksville is that it goes through multiple levels. Like, some of it is the comics that they're talking about in there, and then it goes back to the world where he's walking around, and it really handles all those levels with each of them. It talks a lot about New Zealand history. Horrocks is from New Zealand, and it really brings all those things together. I mean, it's also got a lighthouse, so it's got the sea in it, which I seem to be obsessed with. But and it's just beautifully drawn, and really the characters are just so lovingly sketched, and the story is great. And another thing that Dylan does is he uses the imagery over again, like the continuing images of the woman driving the car. Like, every time it means something different. Every time you see this image in the book, like, it's a different reason for it. So I love the book Hicksville so much, and it's so beautifully written, and it really talks a lot about comics. It comes out from Drawn and Quarterly. It's still available, and I think this, when it came out, again, it influenced a lot of cartoonists. This came out, when did I say it came out? 1998. This book debuted at Small Press Expo, which is going to be going on tomorrow, and I think it was one of the first books that came out at SPX that really became a buzz book, and really, like, everybody was like, wow, I want to do this. I want to make my own Hicksville. I want to have a story that hangs together this well. So I think it's even though it's very little known among the non-comics reading public, I think it's very influential, actually, and much loved, certainly among cartoonists, much loved book, and much quoted as well. I threw this in here. This is also another kind of SPX book, published by our comics expert here in the audience. But this was a slim volume. It's not really a novel. It was more like a short story about a man who goes to visit his wife's grave, and her ghost comes out of the grave, and they go back. And it's very, very elegiac. And but it was such a beautiful package. It was a small book, beautifully printed, and by a guy named Jordan Crane, who came out of a printmaking background, very fine artist. And this isn't really a novel, but I threw it in here because I think when this is a book that people, again, were like, I want to do that. I want to put out a beautiful little book like this. So, okay, this book, probably the most obscure. Has anyone read Book Hunter? Yes, all right. We have a couple of our comics experts who have read this. Because I'm at the Library of Congress. This is the greatest action movie ever set at a library, and it is true. It is true. This is it's based on a real story. It's by a guy named Jason Shiga. He's a mathematician, kind of eccentric cartoonist. He lives on the West Coast, and his books are all very about the format and mysteries, but the mysteries are very contextual in the work. So Book Hunter is based on a real story about a rare book that was stolen from the Oakland Public Library in 1973. And the crack team of library detectives get on the case to solve this. And so it has this topic of finding the book, and yet it uses all the cliches of detective TV shows. You know, like, all right, guys, listen up. It was about 5 months ago that all 8 copies of the China Lobby in America were stolen from OPL. As we got replacements, they were stolen as well. We finally had our pressman print up a couple copies using a radioactive dye. That led us here. And the whole book is like this police procedural where they're using library stamps, glue, and card catalogs. So, yes, if you have not, you must get a copy of this. It's hilarious. This would also make a great action movie. I mean, seriously, I wish if I were going to make a comic movie, I would make it based on Book Hunter. Even though the art is kind of rudimentary, but it doesn't matter. And that's one of the things about graphic novels as well that's so amazing, is that the art style can be incredible, complex, beautiful, realistic, or it can be very simple, as Jason Shiga's work is, but it still tells a story, and it still gives you that sense of fulfillment as you follow along with him. Shiga has actually created another book. I don't have a slide. I probably should have put one in, but it's called Meanwhile, which is a choose your own adventure book, but it's about a kid who wants an ice cream cone. He says, do you want vanilla or chocolate? And depending on how you answer that, you follow a color code. The whole book has tabs, so you open it, you go back and forth. There's something like over 100,000 different ways you can read this book, and that book is pretty well known. So. Let's see. Okay, Gemma Bovary by Posey Simmons. Has anybody read this book? Has anybody? See, very one. Yes, well worn. Okay. Posey Simmons is an English cartoonist. She's well known there. Her comics appeared in The Guardian, and they were serialized. So she would do one page in the newspaper. Each week there would be one page, and they're pretty long, they're complex. These are very written. I would say this is probably the first book I've talked about on this, well, maybe Peter Bagg's work, but that really the language is just as important as the art. Although the art is delightful, you can see the characters are wonderful, but there's a lot of dialogue. Now, she bases her work on classic novels. So just Gemma Bovary is based on Madame Bovary by Flaubert. But it's about a kind of upwardly mobile English woman who goes to the French countryside and thinks she's going to be all that. And, for a while she is, but then things go terribly wrong, but accompanied by arch dialogue and, drinking a lot of wine. So, and baguettes, of course. The baguette becomes a symbol of many things in this book. But for those who love, Downton Abbey or anything like this, I would definitely recommend Posey Simmons. Her other book was Tamara Drew, which is based on Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy, and that was made into a movie that came out a couple of years ago in England. So, but I wish she was better known here because her books are, again, have a real literary quality to them. The writing is amazing. And they're very fulfilling and, very well thought out. The characters are so well drawn. I mean, they're just A+. And, I'm sorry that she's not better known here, but her books are available. So let's see. Okay, probably my favorite contemporary cartoon novelist is Jason, a Norwegian cartoonist. Anybody read this book? Anyone? Yes? Okay, all right, yes. I Killed Adolf Hitler. Is about, Jason works in this anthropomorphic style. He kind of based it a little bit on the Disney stuff I was talking about a long time ago, mixed with a little Tintin. It's about a hitman who is hired to go back in time using a time machine and kill Adolf Hitler, which is awesome. Sounds great. But then Hitler gets into the time machine, and things don't go so well. But the thing I love about Jason is that his books are very compact. The stories unfold, bam, 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 bam. Like each panel advances it. He doesn't have time for messing around. So even though there's a lot of action scenes in here, it's very compact. And along the way he meets this woman, and she is he is hired to kill her, but he can't do it. So, but she comes back into the time. And this story goes back and forth through time under the time machine. Has the last page, is probably my favorite last page ever in a graphic novel, where just the regrets that they both have of this time machine and how they used it and why their relationship worked or didn't work during this whole caper to kill Hitler. It's devastating. The other thing I love about Jason is that he has these kind of adventure stories, but it's always about there's always this personal, it's usually romance. It's usually a doomed romance. I guess I love doomed romance, so any novel that's about doomed romance I will be into, and Jason certainly fits the bill. Let me see. I haven't talked at all about mainstream comics or mainstream work, and only two that I've even mentioned have a writer and an artist. The first was Watchmen, of course, and then I mentioned the Neil Gaiman book, and here's another one. And then why haven't I mentioned a lot of these books? Because I feel that the writer-artist system isn't as conducive to creating great works. I just feel that's much more difficult using the serialization method. And also a lot of graphic novels that you see now are collections of comics that have come out, and there's editorial dictates, and it's not as personal as a medium. So. But I do feel that this book is great because Morrison and Quitely really connected. They really knew. Morrison, as writer, Scottish writer, has written Superman, Batman, and many books for Vertigo, Invisibles. He's kind of a guru. A lot of his stuff is about altered states and about secret cabals and conspiracies, that kind of stuff. But in this book, it's about a kitty, a puppy, and a bunny. And they are cybernetically enhanced, and they try to escape. So already we have a potential Old Yeller situation coming at us. And so there is some heartbreak involved in this graphic novel, I will not lie, when you have three little animals in jeopardy. It's kind of based on an incredible journey, too, which is, the animals trying to get home. What makes this book great is the art. I mean, I mentioned a little while ago with Jason Shiga that doesn't have to be great art, but you know what? When it's great art, it's pretty great. So, there's obviously some violence is happening here, but the way that Quietly depicts these animals, they can talk, they have limited brain power, and we kind of hear their thoughts. It's very poignant because they're saying run, which is what the animals think. Morrison, the author, is a great animal lover and animal activist, and he really wrote this book to protest, experimentation on animals. And it's a very powerful work. That there are some images in here that are pretty searing. Let's put it that way. And you can't go wrong with a kitty, a puppy, and a bunny. But another book, this book is very well known. Actually, has anybody read The Arrival? Anyone? Okay, yeah, a few. It's interesting what people. Anyway, Sean Tan is pretty well known. He's won an Oscar, so I would say this book is very well known. But the reason I put it on here is it's not really often considered a graphic novel. It's not really often spoken of in the graphic novel sphere, but it really is, even though there's no words in it whatsoever. And this is another one where the images really tell the story. Tan is an amazing animator. He's from Australia. He is, specializes in these incredible imaginative creatures. And The Arrival is about immigration. He based it on the Australian immigration experience. But when you look at, when I read the book, I thought it was about New York. It wasn't until I looked at the author flap and saw that he was from Australia that I was like, oh, wow, it's so universal. He makes it completely universal through not having any words in it and just the imagery. So this is definitely a book. I think now I'm into kind of the modern era of books that are graphic novels pretty well established now. So these aren't as groundbreaking, I'd say. But The Arrival is pretty incredible, and I've seen quite a few books that are trying to be like The Arrival recently. So just want to finish up with a couple books that are new this year, just to kind of see where we've come. The Property by Rutu Modan. I could not love this book anymore. Rutu Modan is an Israeli cartoonist. She has done two books. The other one was called Exit Wounds. This is about a woman coming back to Poland with her granddaughter, where her family had property, and they kept it during World War II. And she's come back with her granddaughter to see what's become of the property and secretly find out what's happened to some of the people, to find out what's happened to her past. And what I love about this book is that it does deal with themes of the Holocaust, but it's not so obvious about it, I guess. It deals with a lot more, and I love the way Rutu treats the grandmother. She's this really crafty character. She's a lot like, sometimes you say you can't get anything past your grandma, and like the granddaughter does not know that her grandmother has this secret agenda, and the grandmother's sneaking around to go see people and do things. And here she's looking out the window and seeing that seeing how it used to be, and imagining how it used to be. So it has the poignancy again between the past and the present. And it is a really amazing book that I think Modan is really the closest thing we have right now to a novelist in comics, in that the themes are so well played out, the characters are so everything fits together. By the end, you see exactly how it happened, and everything that was laid out, the questions are answered in a really beautiful way. And finally, I'll end. This is another book that just came out. It's available at the show, and the cartoonist will be at the show, as will Rutu Modan. Today is the last day of the rest of your life. And this is not a novel, but it's actually her memoir of being a punk teenager in Germany, or Austria actually, in the 80s, the early 80s, and then just deciding with no money whatsoever to go to Italy, and with this crazy girl. And you know, a lot of people have the crazy friend experience. This is the ultimate crazy friend experience because as they go on, I mean, I love the way she draws this. Like they don't even have clothes to wear. They have like nothing, you know, so they want to go to the beach in Italy. So she tears off her T-shirt and makes a swimsuit. So, wow, that looks great. That works, doesn't it? Sometimes mom was right. She's been talking about how her mother told her to be inventive. But then she goes into the water and has to keep putting it on. The fabric sucks up water and gets super heavy. I should have realized you can't make a swimsuit out of a T-shirt. So they learned many lessons, many far worse than that along those lines. And it's pretty brutal. And you know, to know that it really happened is pretty stunning. But I just love the way she captures it all. And you know, at the end, what have we learned? Again, you know, when you see the themes, the story, this is real life, but she shaped her own experiences into something that has that journey, that doesn't just go from point A to B. It has so many complexities along the way, and when she comes back, it was a tough journey, but a really a great example of taking your true life and really shaping it into a narrative that's about all the stupid things we do when we were a kid. So yeah. There's a lot of graphic novels out there. These are just a few of the ones that I really like, and I would urge you to explore. I've mentioned so many books that anything that you have not, you know, I've mentioned here that you'd like to know more about, I'd be happy to answer questions. If you're around for Small Press Expo, they'll be selling tons of these books there. But there's something for everybody. There's all kinds of stories, and I think that's the beauty of it. And I think I just look forward to, I mean, this is just some ideas I threw together about it, but I really look forward to exploring more and kind of seeing the development of them and seeing those hidden threads of the graphic novel. So, thank you. And anybody have any questions out there? I guess I answered it all. Yes?
Well, I don't want to say an onslaught of things you left out.
I know, that I knew was the danger, yes.
But what about Jimmy Corrigan?
Well, I said that. He's asking what about Jimmy Corrigan. I agree. But I said that book is very well known, and that's why I wanted to talk about books that weren't as well known. So, I mean, I could obviously talk about that's very important. I agree. So, I mean, I left out Seth. I left out Joe Sacco. I left out Julie Doucet. I left out tons of fantastic. But then we'd be here all day, and nobody wants that. So.
One other just quick comment, if I could. As a librarian, the term graphic novel is kind of confusing for me because so much of this is factual and real life experiences. So, you know, when the term novel enters into it, it's like it gets confusing.
Right. Well, that's something people have argued about all along. People, he says the graphic novel is not, they're not novels. In fact, that last book I showed wasn't a novel. It was an autobiography. And yeah, well, we've gone back and forth about that. Some people want to call it graphic fiction as opposed to graphic nonfiction. You know, unfortunately, when a term catches on, it catches on. I mean, I was talking about superhero books that are called graphic novels, but they're not. They're collections. And or anthologies, really. So I agree. I think people are trying to, I think as things get better known, I think people are trying to use the graphic fiction and graphic nonfiction. I know for journalism, people are trying to call it graphic nonfiction. So I don't know. I don't know if it will catch on. So, yeah. Yes?
What do you consider a collection of comics that is, each unit is a chapter in the full thing, and then when it's put together, you got the whole one? Because Dickens came
Right.
out that way, and that was a novel. So
Right.
I consider these
Right.
things, when it is a complete story, not just episodes,
Yeah.
it is a novel.
Right.
That came out in separate pieces.
Right, absolutely. And I think he's saying that the novel is, even though it was serialized, as Dickens' works were, that it creates a novel. And a lot of the books that I just talked about were serialized. You know, We Three came out in 3 separate issues, but it was planned as a whole story. You know, Bone I mentioned on there. That came out over a period of 13 years, right? And, you know, I mean, a lot goes on in 13 years, but there's an ongoing thread. So I think one of the things about, it can't, sometimes the serialized comics, I think, are very disappointing in that way. And I think but I think it can be really great. I think that's the art, you know. I mean, one of the things I love about Rutu Modern's work is that she did do it as a graphic novel, came out in one piece. And The Book Hunter is another book that came out in one piece. Fires, Violent Cases. I mean, there's a few books on there that came out in one go. But a lot of them were serialized. Hicksville was serialized. You know, obviously Watchmen was serialized. Jimmy Corrigan was serialized first. So it certainly, you know, can be great. I have a personal love of people who could just sit down and for 5 years and put out a 400-page graphic novel, you know, or 10 years or however long. I'm very impressed by that. And, you know, but it's not the only way. So, and certainly economically, it's very difficult. And yes.
Are they making a movie of Why the Last Man? I thought I heard something about that.
They have been talking about that for a long time, and I don't know. To my taste, it's a little bit like The Walking Dead. It's kind of this post-apocalyptic story. She asked what happened to the Why the Last Man movie. So, I don't know. They keep talking about it. I mean, I think as Brian Vaughan becomes more well-known and the author becomes more well-known, maybe it'll always be revisited. I think it'd be really hard to do as a movie. I don't know how you'd do the themes, because it really is about the development. It's about, oh my God, what are we going to do now? And The Walking Dead is kind of like, oh my God, what are we going to do now? So I think it's a lot like that. So I think it might have a hard time now. So anyone else? So, all right.
What was the name of the Adolf Hitler one?
Of the what?
The Adolf Hitler comic.
Adolf Hitler. Oh, I Killed Adolf Hitler. Yeah, by Jason. So, anyway. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening to me blah, blah, blah.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.